Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I hope you all had a great Halloween with family, friends. If you have little ones, hopefully they dressed up and did some trick-or-treating. And I am joined by a guest co-host, and you can hear him. You can hear him driving a little bit. He's road warrioring, I guess, if that's a word, this week. Cody Toomey, he's on the road for his day job, but did decide to join us to talk a little Bengals. Obviously, a lot going on. Cody, hopefully you're doing hands-free talking and you are focusing on driving. But how are you, my friend?
Doing well. Got the new work vehicle, so Apple CarPlay. Two hands on the wheel, headed west on I-30.
Nice. Well, be safe. And I'll try not to do anything that makes you veer or say anything that makes you veer off the road or anything like that. But I'm happy to have you.
Good.
I'm happy to have you with us. My normal co-host would be joining us, Scott Schulte, even with Cody. He's a little under the weather this evening, so unfortunately he couldn't make it. But again, glad to have Cody back on the show, and he's heading back home to Texas. And drive safe, my friend. But let's just dive right in. You know, normally when we start a show during a game week, we like to talk about, kind of the post-mortem, what happened this week, what the Bengals, and we're going to do that with the Colts. But there's a bit of big news that had hit this week, and unfortunately, it's kind of more news, same kind of result. And it's about AJ McCarron and the non-trade that happened with the Browns. Now, reportedly, if you remember in the draft, the Bengals were offered by who we think was the Browns a second-round pick for AJ McCarron. This week, it appears that right before the trade deadline, AJ McCarron the Bengals were offered for AJ McCarron by the Cleveland Browns a second-round pick and a third-round pick in next year's draft. Now, if you look at the Cleveland Browns record, those would be pretty high picks. So Cody, I've got a few questions for you. Number one, what are your overall thoughts on how this played out? Obviously, we know now that the trade didn't go through. Initially, it had seemed that there was maybe a little miscommunication from both sides, but as more details emerge, it seems that the onus is more on the Browns for this deal not getting done. So were you surprised? Were you disappointed? Just kind of your overall thoughts on the non-trade of AJ McCarron to the Browns, which to me was a little surprising within the division and the animosity the Brown family has to that organization. But your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I think you have to be disappointed as a Bengals fan, right? Because you're getting two priority picks. Now, it's always been reported the Browns were offering a second and a third, but it doesn't specifically said the Browns second and the Browns only have their third, so it would have to be their third. But they do own three second-round picks, so it's possible that would be the Denver pick, or I believe they actually own Kansas City's pick as well. So, those picks the Denver pick would probably be right around where the Bengals pick, probably middle of the second. And then Kansas City pick would obviously be later. But still, a day two pick is something, you would want to keep. And to not say you're disappointed with the outcome, even if you're AJ McCarron truther guy, you have to think, look, it doesn't matter what you think. The Bengals obviously don't see him as the starter. They've never when Andy played poorly the first 2 weeks, nothing was brought up about maybe AJ starting a game. So you're getting a guy who doesn't play for you, hasn't played in 22 months, and you're getting day two picks for that. You have to think that's a good haul. Now, from what I've read and what I've heard, I think what happened is the owner said, let's do it for Hugh. Hugh wants to win some games, try to save his job. And I think Sashi Brown and the analytics guys begrudgingly admitted to doing it because they had to, because the owner is telling them to. They've executed plenty of trades. They know how to make trades. Someone didn't want that trade to happen. Told his intern to send it to the Bengals, who they sent it to Duke Tobin instead of sending it to the NFL, which clearly is just a way for them. And apparently, even on top of that, in case the Bengals would have seen it and forwarded it along, I also saw today that they purposely messed up. Well, not purposely. They also didn't include the verbiage of AJ McCarron would have to pass a physical on their piece, which also would mean that the two trade pieces were not equal, and it would have voided the trade even at that point. So I think analytics guys didn't want to give up their picks, and they're hoping they're going to get an extra year, and that if someone gets fired, it would be the head coach. So I'm not going to be conspiracy theory guy. I just think that analytics guys didn't want to give up the picks, and the owners and the coach did, and they got desperate. They gave up more than the analytics guys were willing to do. I mean, the Bengals have been on record as saying they told them second and a third, and they hang up the phone, and the Browns are the ones that called them back. So, I think you have to say the onus is on the Browns because some reason they called back, but somebody wasn't on board with this trade. It has to be the case.
Yep, and there's so many pieces to this. You really nailed a lot of good points there. Obviously, we know the history of Hugh Jackson and the Cincinnati Bengals, both in the early mid 2000s as an assistant coach with the wide receivers. Then he returns after being fired from the Raiders, but right before that stint, or right before he rejoined the Bengals in this kind of mini renaissance the Bengals experienced earlier in this decade. Obviously, Hugh Jackson was a coach of the Raiders, lost Jason Campbell that year when the Raiders were trying to make a playoff push. They made that huge deal for Carson Palmer. The Bengals ended up, getting a couple picks, one of which was Dre Kirkpatrick. So, that kind of worked out. So Hugh Jackson wants a quarterback, and he is not afraid to sacrifice some draft picks for that, obviously. And this appears to be the case. The odd thing to me is you've got a rookie in Deshaun Kaiser that you spent a second-round pick on. Obviously, he's struggled, but young guy, you kind of want to see what you have in him. They have Kevin Hogan, a guy they've tried out, hasn't really worked. They've had Cody Kessler, another guy that they've tried out, hasn't really worked well. I mean, you're bringing in a fourth quarterback at that point and giving up more draft collateral. That's kind of puzzling to me. Obviously, if you've read anything else since the news of this non-trade has occurred, Jimmy Haslam, the owner of the Browns, and his wife, I guess, who was also part owner or involved in the front office, they went absolutely nuclear on their front office staff about this trade not going through. Obviously, they not only did they not get a player that many people in that building wanted, but they have egg on their face because this trade was botched. Now, obviously, we know that the criticisms of the Bengals front office, minimal, kind of minimized staff, a lot of people doing multiple jobs that should be delegated to multiple people, but one, it's now given to one person, that sort of thing, minimal scouts. We know that things have gotten better in the Bengals front office of late, but obviously, you kind of see it and you go, well, these two front offices, there's issues there for sure, but this does seem to be on the Browns' lap in terms of blame. Now, Cody, when I look at this trade, obviously the Bengals were intrigued because they get what they value the most, which is draft picks and high draft picks. I was a little bit bummed out or surprised, especially with the plethora of talent the Browns have at their offensive line position. Obviously, the offensive line is a major point of weakness for the Bengals this year. They're kind of teetering around 500. They have a chance to make a push going forward and maybe sneak into a wild card if things start falling their way and they rattle off some wins here. Were you surprised that they didn't actually ask for a player-for-player trade or a pick and a player trade? Because it seems like, to me, Marvin Lewis in his last year, this kind of make or break for a lot of people in this organization. It seems to me that if they really want to make something happen in 2017, they should have asked for someone that could come in right away and potentially help them this year, not 1, 2, 3 years down the line, right?
Yeah, but if you're the Browns, they're trying to rebuild through their offensive line, which is obvious by their free agency moves, their trades, and things in the offseason. They're trying to build in the trenches. So they probably weren't interested in moving any pieces back on the offensive line even though they're in a position, I'm sure Hugh thinks the only way for me to have a chance here is to keep my quarterback who might struggle upright and give him time. Um, yes, but I think player for player deals are much harder because each team is going to value that player in their own eyes, not in the outside eyes, right? So I think doing that and making a player matchup is much more difficult than we value a day two pick at this. We value our player at this. If we get two day two picks, we can use one of them to fill his void next year and one to fill another void. And we had a fifth round pick that we used to get AJ McCarron 5 years ago or 4 years ago. So we're coming at a net positive. We're going to go ahead and make this move. It's where if you just try to get players, I think it becomes more difficult to make things match up. And I think another thing about Marvin and about this staff is I think Marvin knows that he either is done after this year and that's in his mind that he's going to retire, or he knows that Mike Brown's going to give him a vote of confidence no matter what, as much as we don't want to hear that or do, depending on what camp you're in. And he knows his job is safe. So he thinks, all right, if we can do this, we can do it. And I can go back. I mean, if you think about it, that would have given them 6 picks in the first 2 days. They would have probably had 5 picks in the first 50. 10% of the first 50 picks would have been ours. And
That's crazy.
Crazy to think they would have had that many picks, and they would have had another pick at the end of the third round of all people thinking, they're saying that, that may be the case, and for Zeitler. So when you think about that, they could have really put the old reboot button fast and got a shot in the arm. Whether that's you take 3 offensive linemen early, then you still have 2 luxury picks. However you want to do it, it makes you able to fix this team pretty quick and fill a lot of the holes they have. And it just sucks as a Bengals fan because I think it's clear that the Browns purposely botched this trade because somebody in that building didn't want it to happen. And if Haslam is coming out saying we screwed it up, I think it goes back to what I said, that Sashi Brown and the analytics guys that he's brought in, he doesn't want to fire them in the season because that makes them look even worse.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody's gonna have their head roll, and we'll find out what happened with this story when the CYA starts coming out as people get rolled. And to say that Sashi Brown, I mean, we talk about the Bengals having a small staff, but they completed their end of their trade. The NFL has came out and said at 3:55 we received the Bengals paperwork. We never received the paperwork for the Browns.
Right.
So I think having a small staff is not a big deal. And Sashi Brown telling his assistant to email the paperwork over, that sounds extremely fishy to me, that he would actually want it to get done if that's how, hey, assistant guy, wink, wink, make sure you email that over to the NFL, wink, wink, send it to Duke Tobin because he's not going to check his email right now.
Yeah, it's just a very weird scenario, and it's also odd because, again, the Browns were apparently interested in McCarron back in the draft, and it didn't happen. So now that this kind of happens, and there's all kinds of questions, it's very possible what you're saying, even though it sounds a little tinfoil hat type of theory, it's very possible that there were people that kind of passive-aggressively put the skids on this deal, whereas the Bengals...
Went rogue.
Yeah.
If Sashi goes rogue and decides, hey, Haslam says I have to do it, and thinks that, hey, we'll just blame the Bengals and then I'll get out of it, right? Well, unfortunately, in this day and age, everything is tracked, and the Bengals have the email that they sent over. So it's like in the NFL, I can imagine that Sashi Brown probably didn't think the NFL would come out and be like, now the Bengals sent over the proper paperwork and let him throw him under the bus. But, the NFL has no one to back, and they want to show that they didn't screw up the deal,
Yep. Yeah, we're talking with Cody Toomey, and I'm Anthony Cosenza. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Thanks for tuning in live. And I want to say thank you. We're going to continue talking about a number of different topics. I want to say thank you to our listeners who still tune in live. I know our schedule, in terms of when we normally record, our schedule over the past few weeks has been a little crazy, a little mixed up, and I apologize for that. There's been some different kinds of scenarios that have been popping up with us on this program, but we appreciate you dealing with our wackiness and still tuning in, still downloading the program. You can get this program on iTunes, on SoundCloud. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, get all of our videos. All of our content is on cincyjungle.com. And then you can get in touch with us on Twitter at BengalsOBI, as well as via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. One final thing, I think I'm kind of getting the sentiment from you already. But one final thing on this McCarron non-trade thing, even though it was not the Bengals' fault, from what we know of this situation, do you think the Bengals are major losers that in this non-trade? Or do you sit here and you say, you know what, maybe the Bengals optimistically rattle off a few wins here in the middle of the season, they get back in the AFC playoff picture, and you look at a team like Houston, who just on Thursday found out that in practice it looks as if Deshaun Watson, who was playing very well, tore his ACL and he's done for the year, it appears. Do you say, well, you know what, even though we didn't get the draft picks and we could have had some great collateral next year, the Bengals have a very good insurance policy on the bench in case something happens to Andy Dalton, which could be more so the case this year than many others because of the struggles of the offensive line and the hits he's been taking this year?
I'm going to go ahead and stay on the fence here for you and agree with you that I think if there's any year that we may see our backup and it's predictable of that, it's going to be this year, in the sense that Andy's taking hits. You can tell he's very slow to get up at times. He even the camera caught him with the nice eye roll at Bodine last week when he just totally whiffed on a block. You saw Andy look at him and just eye roll like, dude, I mean, seriously, the guy right in front of you just walked right by you and you didn't touch him. Please. So I think yes, I think he's a good insurance policy, but at the same time, what are the realistic odds that they're going into a rough 3-game road stretch? The Jaguars match up incredibly well with them, poorly for the Bengals side at least, and you're going on a 3-game road stretch that you're going to have to probably win at least 2 of to stay in the hunt. And then, you know, what does McCarron give you if he's got to rattle off 3 or 4 wins at the end of the year? Can you really make it? Now, I'll put some blame on the Bengals for being the Bengals, and I'll give them some credit for being a little bit out of their box normal. Like, normally in midseason, they're not even answering the phone for something like this. However, I will give them a little bit of a jab that I give them at times on Twitter, is that, like last year, we knew that they weren't going to make a qualifying offer, an offer that Zeitler would consider, right? They were pretty much out of the playoff hunt and could have probably dealt Zeitler for maybe a 2nd-round pick, maybe a 3rd-round pick. And I know we'll probably get a 3rd-round compensatory pick, but when you look at draft capital, and that's kind of my bread and butter, if you want to give up a next year's pick, you got to give up an extra round. So getting a 3 this year is like getting a 2 next year. Mm-hmm. So having that pick now is better than having to wait, because they would have had that pick for this year's draft. So it's possible that they brought in a guy that could be playing in Zeitler's spot right now. So I will give them a little bit of a ding, saying if you know that AJ's probably going to be gone after this year, they're probably going to tender him with a 2nd-round pick, and if he stays, they'll get a 3rd round 2 years from now. If you could have said, all right, give us the 2, give us a 4, I guarantee the Browns do that deal. And I think that's reasonable to get back, and it's still a pretty good capital return. And you make sure you get as much for an asset as you can. At best, they'll get a 2 for him if someone signs him on the tender. And maybe the Browns will do that, but they're probably going to get a 3rd-round pick in the future which is really a 4th-round pick to this year. So essentially, you lose the whole 2nd-round pick by being stubborn to what you wanted to get. And that all comes back to sometimes you got to have good self-evaluation and know that this team's probably not going to win the Super Bowl. So if you lose a backup and can't make the squeak into the playoffs because of it, let's be realistic. It's been 27 years since we've seen a playoff win. What's 28?
Yeah. Well, it's definitely possible if the Bengals start to, and again, the team is young. They've got a lot of young guys, and we saw a lot of young guys step up this last week against the Colts. But, they could hit a stride late in the season once these guys start to mature, get their NFL legs under them a little bit. But as of now, it's been kind of a roller coaster start to the season, that's for sure.
And if they stay healthy, right? If they stay healthy,
right.
And other teams have critical injuries, not to wish injuries upon, but I mean, if the Steelers lose Bell or lose Big Ben, I mean, their chances of continuing to win greatly diminish. And the Ravens haven't been world beaters. The division's not that difficult. So really,
right.
If the Steelers were to have an untimely or a big critical injury, the division is wide open for them if they can get, 7 or 8, 9 wins, somewhere in that range. So, it's not out of the question. I guess you have to look at both sides. Do they want to look to push the rebuild or play for now?
I got you. And I agree. I will say this. You mentioned this critical stretch of 3 straight road games. These are teams that are kind of middle of the road teams that they'll be facing, the Jaguars, the Titans, and the Broncos. They've had their ups and downs this year already. Broncos made a switch at quarterback. Jaguars have lost a couple of guys on Allen Robinson's out for the year, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, they've been a little up and down as well. If the Bengals can kind of get past those teams, get a couple of wins there, all of a sudden Houston, a team that they lost to earlier this year, loses their starting quarterback. They lost J.J. Watt for the year. Whitney Merciless is out for the year. So,
huge blow to Houston today.
Yeah.
It can't be understated how big he had changed things for them.
Right.
If they want to beat the Jags this week, they got to get out to an early lead. You can't let the Jags get a lead on you because they'll just pin their ears back. And with this offensive line, Andy may not make it out of the game alive.
Yep, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. I did see Bass Hunter in our live YouTube chat just said when we were talking about Dalton potentially McCarron sticking around might be a good thing given how many hits Dalton is taking. Bass Hunter said Dalton is getting creamed, and that's a simple statement, but it's very true. I mean, that's kind of what's going on, unfortunately, for Andy. And, there's a lot of residual effects that also come with getting hit often and pressured often. So, Cody, let's transition to a little bit more of a positive note, I guess. The Bengals did pull off a win against the Colts last week at home. It was a squeaker, 24-23. And I got to say, for those of you that read CincyJungle.com, I got to pat myself on the back because that is the exact score and result that I predicted in my weekly game preview. So pat on the back to me. But I want to ask this to you, Cody. What were some of what was like one aspect that you were like, wow, that was really good. That was really well done by the Bengals this week. And what was one aspect of their game that you said, wow, that was just terrible?
I think you go back to terrible and just I'll start with the negative and we'll spin to the positive. I think the negative point was multiple missed calls on the offensive line where multiple rushers came free and untouched. The big play, not the big play, but a big third down. I think it was a third down, might have been a second down, where Dalton ends up actually backpedaling and then hitting LaFell on a cross. Side of the line missed their blocks except for Fisher. Basically, Fisher took the guy with the closest route to the quarterback. The other two guys were free rushers because the offensive line wasn't communicating who should be blocked and who's coming and who's not coming. And I think that was just – it goes back to the whole thing. I mean, Dalton's just getting – I think Dave Lapham says after the game he looks like he's been in a boxing match. His face is all over it, and you can tell he's dejected. he's seeing ghosts out there as far as guys that are open that he's not throwing to because he is under so much pressure. So I think that was probably, to me, the worst part was just the offensive line communication. I think the best part you have to look at is just the positives of the young defensive players. William Jackson, the third, on the T.Y. Hilton, he made a huge mistake and was able to use his speed, get back, and break that pass up to T.Y. Hilton, one of the best speed receivers in the game. I mean, that is not anything that we've seen as Bengals fans in a long time. Maybe even the first year Pac-Man was back here when he kind of was doing a lot of those pass breakups and catching up from behind with his speed. And, that and Carl Lawson just continuing to be, knock on wood, healthy, and everything that we thought were his positives coming into his draft season without, everyone said if he stays healthy, he's going to be this. Well, body, he's staying healthy, and I think the biggest positive from that game is that Carl Lawson and William Jackson III both look like cornerstone pieces that this team can build around for the future. Similar to when Geno and Vontaze came on as young players, and we thought, wow, these guys were guys we didn't give up much for, and we got a lot out of that right now, and they're really good players.
Yep, and if you're, everybody knows that 2010 draft class. You got Dunlap in the second round, and then you got Geno Atkins in the fourth round. Obviously, a couple years later, Burfict, the undrafted free agent, and those are your cornerstones of that defense. For me, I'm going to say my biggest disappointment was the special teams unit, and that's usually a very sound unit, Darren Simmons is known as one of the better special teams coaches, and like it or not, the Bengals usually use some of their exciting rookies, their high draft picks of recent years on special teams. So there's a lot of talented guys on the special teams unit. There's a lot of speed, but my God, you give up a 20-yard punt return. Your punt returner, who's been so steady over the past year and a half, Alex Erickson, muffs 2 punts, loses one of them. Randy Bullock misses a field goal. Well, he gets blocked, I should say. And more on that a little later. And then he's hurt. Yeah. It just was, and to me, as you go into these games coming up, the Jags, the Titans, the Broncos, especially on the road, and the Steelers, and then the Ravens again, those teams are beatable. You don't need to absolutely play perfect, but the Bengals on special teams had 2 opportunities for the other team to recover fumbles and missed what should have been an easy 3-point play. You cannot do that as you're trying to make the playoffs. You just can't. Obviously Brandon LaFell almost had another fumble as well. It just Joe Mixon had another fumble. That's not special teams, obviously, but you can't give the opposition a lot of opportunities to get turnovers, especially even though your defense is playing pretty well. They're not creating many turnovers. So the Bengals, I think that comes with youth. I think that comes with carelessness. I think it comes with maybe,
I think it shows how much Cody Core is. It might be an indicative of how much Cody Core is important to that special teams unit now too.
Yep. And one thing I also want to add about the special team struggles, I don't have the exact number with me, but I think it was 34.8 in terms of net yards per punt for Kevin Huber, by far his lowest of the season so far, and he's had a pretty good season. No punts inside the opposition's 20. Not a good day from him either. So special teams to me was a disappointment. There's so many other things I could point out as positives. I totally agree with you, Cody, on the young defensive players. Jordan Willis blocks a punt early in the game.
I forgot about Willis. Willis had a great game.
Yep. Carl Lawson has a sack. Darquez Denard's playing well. William Jackson's playing well. So a lot of young guys, higher picks, doing some good things. I agree with you there. I'm just going to kind of go cliche and broad and just say, you know what? A lot of things were not going the Bengals' way on Sunday. Yeah, they weren't playing world beaters in the Colts and Jacoby Brissett, but they found a way to win, and they created. Yep, they created a play that, especially Carlos Dunlap, created a play when it was absolutely critical. They created a play, and then the defense stepped up towards the end of the game, not only with Dunlap's play, but beyond that, stifling them in a 1-point game where even a field goal could have won, getting them in field goal position. It wasn't pretty to me, but it was a must-win game if you want to keep your playoff hopes alive. They did it, and somehow they found a way to do it. That's kind of my positive out of it. So, Cody, one last thing on this game. Are you encouraged or discouraged because you look at the Colts team, and I don't think they're very good, to be honest with you. Now, in the NFL, a win is a win, and we all know that, and get the W, as you just said. And I don't know. 1 point, you're at home. You're kind of facing what is and probably will be a career NFL backup in Brissett when it's all said and done. Are you saying, hey, you know what? I'm relieved they got the win. I think they might ride some momentum. Or are you kind of saying, yeah, it's still not that great of a team, at least to this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to be a slightly discouraged, and we don't have Tom Brady and a quarterback that I think that anyone's going to think all of a sudden he's going to put this team on his back and carry him. But when you're in situations when you need a big play, your big players make big plays, and Carlos Dunlap was able to do that, get the team a much-needed win. I don't think Indianapolis is very good, but I think if you lose that game, again, playoffs totally out of the picture, but there's a really good chance that this fairly young team just spirals out of control if you lose a really big game like this one. So I think that was huge. I'm a slightly discouraged. I think the really missed opportunity is you miss that field goal, you miss the opportunity to score. That would have put them up by 10 at the time, and it could give them a chance to put their foot on a 2-4 team's neck and think, okay, they're just going to give up in the second half. They don't really come out with much fight, as where, luck may have it, some bad call. I think a bad call that went against them causes Indy to get a good field position. The Dunlap personal foul, not Dunlap, the Lawson personal foul. And then all of a sudden, Indy goes, instead of being down big, they go in the half up by 3. So, or 13-10. So, it's a tough, I think you go from being able to squash a team and get them to give up to keep them in line. And that's what goes back to what you said. You can't leave points out there. You can't leave opportunities for the other team because it's the NFL. There's enough players on that team, regardless if they're good or not, that are going to take advantage of them.
Yep. And I will say I thought the Lawson play was a little ticky-tack, but it was called, so whatever there. Obviously, the Bengals open with that punt block by Willis, and you're thinking, oh, game on. We're this is kind of the route that the Bengals need to get going in this pretty tough stretch of games coming up. Unfortunately, they only got a field goal out of that, and they had excellent field position. Again, red zone issues, things like that are kind of coming up, and that's a shame. You can't expect them to score a touchdown every time they're down there. That's not the case, but they have enough talent to be much better on offense than they are. There's still dry spells on offense that I see, even under Bill Lazor. So I'm kind of a little bit of both. I'm discouraged because I think that if you look at that overall roster and the talent everywhere, you would look at the fact that the Bengals seem to be a much more talented team than the Colts. Unfortunately, the score didn't play out that way, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm happy that they found a way to win, and somehow when things weren't going their way, they came up with big plays, and that is a trait of a good team or a playoff team. Not saying that the Bengals are necessarily that at this point, but that is what you need to do. You got to find ways to win when things aren't going your way, and definitely a lot of things were not going the Bengals' way on Sunday, but they won 24-23. They're now 3-4, and they head to Jacksonville to take on a somewhat surprising Jaguars team. The Jaguars, I think we knew just based on how many high draft picks they've had of late. You saw some progress out of Blake Bortles in 2015. A little bit of a regression last year. Not doing as much this year, but he doesn't have to because Leonard Fournette is carrying that team. Did you like that pun there? Carrying the team.
Yes.
But the Jags are 4-3. They're in a tie for the top of the AFC South. And there's so many weird, Cody, as I've looked at this game and doing some things for Cincy Jungle and prepping for this show, the Jaguars have the worst the worst run defense in the NFL in terms of allowing yards, average yards per game they allow. Yet they have the top passing defense in terms of yards allowed per game there. And then, they're not very exciting on offense, but they have the top running leader this year. So, Cody, how do you see this, Matt? You mentioned early in the game. How do you see this game kind of playing out? You mentioned there's kind of weaknesses that play into the Bengals' strengths and vice versa. How do you kind of see this one playing out?
Well, I think if you look back at the Buffalo game, Russell Bodine struggled very mightily with Marcel Darius. The Jaguars made a trade, so they're going to get to see Darius again this week at the nose. So their league worst rush defense, which I think is a little inflated because they have been so good against the pass. Teams have just tried to run it on them. We'll get improvement from Darius for sure, but I think the biggest key to this game is the Bengals have to be able to run the ball. They have to improve their running game and try to keep this game close and run to negate the pass rush of the Jaguars. What if teams found out about the Bengals? If you let them pass rush you, you are going to lose because Lawson's going to get to you, Dunlap's going to get to you, Geno's going to get to you. So what have teams done? They've dinked and dunked, and they've ran the ball right at them because that's the way you can keep the pass rush back and negate kind of one of the strengths of the Bengals. So I think the Bengals would be wise to use that strategy right back at the Jaguars. Make short, quick throws. Marvin, not wanting to play John Ross, doesn't look like he's going to be able to do that this week because looks like LaFell's going to be out. Looks like Cody Core is going to maybe play, but not quite sure. So it looks like good old Marv's going to be forced to play his top 10 pick, even though it seems like he doesn't want to. And I think a great way to beat this Jaguars defense is to throw some short screen passes to him and get him moving and get him in space and see what he can do because AJ Bouye and Ramsey are really good corners that you don't want to go deep with. You don't want Andy taking them on all game. But if you throw short passes or quick runs up the middle, you can maybe break some plays, keep the ball control, and keep time of possession in your favor, or at least near equal, so that you can have a chance to be in this game and let your defense make a play late in the game, and hopefully you can squeak out of there because you go on the road, you just want to try to keep it close and be there in the end.
Yep. And this Jags team has been Jekyll and Hyde. Obviously, they had a big win against the Ravens. That was in London. They've had they beat the Steelers, yet they've had other losses that are kind of inexplicable. And there's times where they look like a well-oiled machine and other times where they look like the Jags we've seen for many years recently. So I guess where you got to start, because this is – and it's really funny because people had, especially Bengals fans, had their reservations about drafting Leonard Fournette, especially if he fell to number 9, and I get that. But he has been I looked at he's averaging a hair under 100 yards a game, 1 touchdown a game. He did miss 1 game because of injury, but I mean, his averages are great, and he's got 4.6 yards per carry this year. He's doing a lot of good things, and obviously as he goes, their offense goes. The Bengals defense has historically been, at least over the past decade or so, has been pretty good at stopping the run. This year's been a little bit of a I don't know what you want to call it. They're middle of the road right now. I believe they're number 16 stopping the run. Now there's an injury potentially to Kevin Minter. We don't know if he's going to play yet or not this week. If so, that moves Burfict into the middle, and then the Bengals will probably have to get kind of creative. Jordan Evans will probably be in the mix, and others.
Vinny Ray has been so bad this year.
Vinny Ray is another. So how confident are you? And is this maybe a week we see, because I've been stunned at the lack of visibility I've seen and playing time from Andrew Billings. Might this be the week that we see more of him, more Pat Sims, and are the Bengals well equipped enough to go up against Leonard Fournette and this number one ranked rushing offense?
I mean, Leonard Fournette's the real deal, and you got to love him if you're a Bengals fan because he got out in open space and pointed at Mike Mitchell and said, come get some, and then ran him over. So you got to like that. But, I mean, they just feed him the ball so much, he wears teams down, and that's their thing is don't let Bortles make mistakes. If you look at their Jekyll and Hyde, it's their first quarter. In the games where they win, they're up big in the first quarter. They just say, until you get this game close, you're going to get 3 doses of Leonard Fournette every drive until we have to punt, and we're just going to cram it down your throat. And then on defense, we're going to come at you and hope your quarterback makes another mistake, and then that's the icing on the cake. So capable of stopping him. I think having Minter is huge because then you keep Burfict in. Vinny Ray has not been good at all, in my opinion, this year, and he's really hurt their defense. And Evans has been good, but at the same time, run stopping's not his forte. I think you have to play a guy like Billings this week and see what you have. I mean, you took him because he slid in the draft. You lost him for all last year. He's supposed to be a run stuffer. Like, go see if he can go in there and move the offensive line and get you some space next to Geno so that guys like Burfict can make tackles within 1 or 2 yards of the line of scrimmage and stop this team. Do I think they'll be successful at it? I'm not super optimistic, to be quite honest. The Jaguars' offensive line has been pretty good, and I think this is going to be tough sledding for them. I hate being negative, but I just really feel like this matchup is not great for them. They've had all this turmoil this week with the AJ McCarron stuff, and the Jags, additional to the fact that they're good at running the ball, they're coming off the bye, so they're well rested. Fournette's back healthy 100%. I would be shocked if he doesn't see 25 carries this week.
Oh, I for sure agree, and I think if he gets that carry, if he gets that many carries, and the Bengals hold him to about 75 or 80 yards or less, I think that's a recipe for success. We'll have to see if they can do that. Even if that's that yardage and Fournette does crack the end zone, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a backbreaker. But I think if they kind of corral him and
3 yards per carry,
I
think 3 yards per carry is the mark they have to hope for.
Yep, I agree. And if they can do that, I can't really see many other ways that they could lose this game. I will say this before we'll get to our score predictions at the end of the show, Cody, for this upcoming game. But if the Bengals were to win this game, even though they've got the Titans coming up, they've got the Broncos coming up, Steelers, Ravens, a lot of other some other NFC North tests coming up. Would you start to believe that, hey, this team's for real, that was a pretty decent Jags team? Or are you kind of saying these are two middle-of-the-road teams and it was kind of a coin flip game?
I think if you go into Jacksonville and win, I think the Jacksonville team is the real deal in the sense that if you can go get them to not be able to play their game. I mean, they went and they beat the Steelers bad. They beat the Colts bad. They beat the Ravens bad. So if you can go in there and make them play your game, I think it says a lot about this team. And maybe they just played down to the Colts because they overlooked them. And I think a win this week really tells you they're 500. You push reset on the season and you say, look, we're 500. We're 4-4. We got 8 games left. and we got to go out there and win 5 of them. And
Yep.
you start off by going to Tennessee and winning that game, and then you got to feel really good about your chances in Denver against Brock Osweiler, even though they have a good defense. I think as long as you come out of this stretch at 5-5, or ideally 6-4, you got to be feeling pretty good about your back half. Now, if you come out of this 4-6 or 3-7, I think you can pretty much put the squash on the season.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think this would, and it seems weird to say because Jacksonville has been such a team that is not. It just they haven't been looked at as a good
They're
team
not good.
In general, and unfortunately, that's just kind of the case with them. But if the Bengals, I think this year this is an improved Jacksonville team. They have their warts. But I think if the Bengals can go down there, get a win, I would be impressed with that one, even though, quote unquote, it is the Jacksonville Jaguars. But I do think they're a pretty decent team. Kind of an interesting comment from our good friend Michael Myers in the YouTube chat, talking about essentially. He said Tom Coughlin has always made the Jaguars good. I think now that he's back I believe he's a consultant or in the front office, he brought something with him to turn it around. And obviously, I agree with that. And I see that identity. I see the ground and pound. I see good defense, smart quarterback play. I think they took a big hit with Allen Robinson getting hurt. He was a very good football. Well, I shouldn't say was. He is a very good football player, but that hurts them immensely, so they've kind of had to alter things. But I know they wanted to run the football because of Tom Coughlin, and I think you'd agree, right, Cody?
Oh yeah, I think that's the staple of Tom Coughlin is how this team is being built. They took a running back early so they could just lean on him, not have Bortles do much, and just try to win that way. So I can't imagine them trying to change they're not going to change the way they play unless you go and make them get behind, make Bortles throw the ball, or else he's not going to do it. And Coughlin going there and getting a competent coach and getting rid of Bradley is something that had to be done.
Yep, and they look like a different team. They sure do. So
I mean, it's going to be a top 5. I mean, would anyone argue they're a top 5 AFC team? I don't think so. I would say.
Well, the AFC. Yeah, that's a great point because the AFC really, to me, yeah.
I mean, you got Kansas City and Pittsburgh, right? You put them up on a pedestal, and then what else? I mean, who else is like? I mean, the Raiders have looked bad at times, looked okay at times, but their offense hasn't been what it has before. The Broncos looked bad. In the AFC South, Tennessee was going to be the team that's great, but they haven't been great. And, then you've got the Jaguars in that division. The Colts are awful. The Texans looked good, but now they lost Watson. Before Watson, they didn't look good. I mean, there's not many teams in the AFC that you're going to go, yeah, that team's a playoff lock. So I think you have to say, that the Jaguars are at least top 10, but they're definitely I think they're top 5 AFC team. I mean, no one else in the AFC is shocking me, and they've shown they can beat teams a lot worse than other teams have been able to.
Yep, and it seems as if there's a couple of pretty good teams in the AFC. I guess you could put the Patriots in there, even though they haven't looked quite the same. You have the Steelers, and they've won some high-profile games, but lost some inexplicable ones. And then you have the Chiefs, who started hot, and now they've kind of faltered a little bit. But you kind of look at those 3, and then there's a lot of teams who just seem that they can beat each other just on any given week. It's just a lot of teams that, I think if the Bengals were to play Houston again, even with some of those guys back in the lineup, I think you could say that the Bengals would probably beat the Texans. It's given a rematch, I think. You could sit here and say the Bengals could probably beat the Ravens in their rematch that's coming up. I'm not very impressed with the Ravens personally. But then you could kind of say, well, the Ravens could also beat the Titans, and there's all these kind of whirlwind of different teams that are kind of middle of the pack, and it's going to be interesting to see how it all sifts out, and how those teams fare against each other as the year wears on. He's Cody Toomey. I'm Anthony Cosenza. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in on a irregular night. Usually we do Wednesday nights. We had to do Thursday night because of some scheduling issues, but I appreciate you tuning in, and I appreciate Cody coming on the air and talking with us. He is on the road and spending a ton of time with us talking Bengals, and appreciate him coming on. And Scott Schulte, feel better, my friend. I know you're a little under the weather. Let's get out of here with a couple of listener questions, Cody. We had a couple queued up. Number one, essentially, it centered around John Ross, and it's kind of just a general. I'm trying to see who it was who sent it our way. I'll get that in a second, but essentially it was what's going on, right? I've heard some things now that they think John Ross is in training camp shape, not game shape. I've heard essentially there's a line of excuses that the team has put out in place as to why not. I mean, obviously he had a nicked up knee and he had to sit, but played about 4 or 5 snaps last week in his return, was healthy against the Texans, had a fumble, was benched. I don't get it. And to me, this is a year. There's so many things to me that are contradictory, and I'm trying to sift through all of them. This is a year that Marvin Lewis should be all in on these uber-talented high picks that he invested in to kind of say, hey, if he wants to keep his job, if the Bengals are losing, hey, give me another year with these guys. We're going to play him more, blah, blah, blah. Or look what these guys did this year. I know what I'm doing when it comes to the draft. I also hear things about, Cody Core might be active on Sundays and Ross isn't because of special teams prowess. Well, I look at John Ross's returnability in college, and that to me doesn't make sense. So how do you try and understand what the team is doing with John Ross this year?
I have no idea what I mean. And Marvin comes out in his press conference and says, "Sometimes I forget he was the number 9 pick." Are you kidding me? Like, that's a top 10 pick, and you just go, "Oh, sometimes I forget he was a top 10 pick, and that's why fans want him to play." Well, if you forget he's a top 10 pick, then you should be fired right now, because you obviously should know the talent level of somebody who you think is worthy of a top 9 pick that you refused to trade out of that pick on because you were worried he wouldn't be there if you traded back. So if you're going to stand on the table and say, we're too worried to lose him because we think our offense, I mean, remember when he was drafted, we think our offense can be unstoppable with him, and then now you're not going to play him? It sometimes how this team and how Marvin makes excuses like, okay, he's in training camp shape. Then don't make him active last Sunday. Say he's still getting back into shape from his injury. But to say he's not going to play over Cody Core blows my mind. The level of talent between the two players is unexplainable how different it is. Ross, when healthy, it can be. I mean, look at Will Fuller. Will Fuller is John Ross who can't catch as well. Like, and he's just destroying it in Houston because they just throw him the ball deep. Like, corner play in the NFL is down. Speed at corner is hard to find. You've got a guy that can blow by anybody and force teams not to double AJ Green, yet you want to give him 6 snaps in his game back. Like, if he's in training camp shape, I bet you he'll still run a 4.3. So is it really that big a deal? Unless his knee's still hurt, there's no reason for them not to give him playing time, and it's just unexplainable to me. Like you said, Marvin should be trying to win his job and keep it. And what is he doing to keep his job if he's not going to play these talented players? Josh Malone, athletic player that they signed with speed, gets out there 1 week, gets separation, gets open, gets a touchdown. What's Brandon LaFell going to – when does he get separation? Never.
Not on deep routes, that's for sure. And that's something that is lacking. I mean, even AJ Green this year is far below his average on 20-plus yard plays this year. And I didn't do the question true justice, so I'm going to give it a follow-up. I did find it. It's from Travis Spanky at I Run Relentless on Twitter. And he said, honest opinion, is this Marvin, Laser, or a Ross thing in terms of him not playing? Andy Reid seems to trust Kareem Hunt. Why can't we trust a rookie? And that's kind of the follow-up is who is this on? To me, it's on Marvin. I don't think it's a Bill Laser
100%.
thing. I think Bill Laser
100%.
I think Bill Laser is chomping at the bit for speed, for someone to get separation, for a player out there that they can get creative with. To me, and this isn't a knock on Ross, but I think he's a far more talented Andrew Hawkins. I think he can do things on special teams. I think you can create gadget plays that are safe but provide excitement. I mean, hell, his only play of the year was a nice little run. He ended up fumbling the ball, but I think he got 8 or 9 yards on it.
And if
you
the
could
guy
do
had
these
put
safe
his helmet
plays
on him, he might have housed that ball. There was no one else in the way. From all 22,
right.
They miss him in that section of tackling and that 9 yards deep. There were 3 guys there. If he happens to go a different direction and the guy misses him, he is gone.
Yeah, and I think that's what he provides you every time you give him the football. Yes, there might be a fumble. Yes, I understand the concern of maybe he runs a corner route instead of a post, and Andy Dalton expects him to be somewhere, and that turns into an interception or a big incompletion or what have you. But these are the rolls of dice you have to take, I think, with exciting picks, top 10 picks.
Your offense is struggling to score points, and you have a guy who you won't play who at any given time he touches the ball can take it to the house. I mean, it's inexplainable. Look at Joe Mixon last week. You can't get him open in the running game because we can't run the ball. And maybe that's why they don't want to throw it deep, is because they're scared to have Andy make a 5-step or a 7-step drop. But you get Mixon the ball in the flat, and what's he do? He takes it for 70 yards. You know?
Yep.
Get Ross the ball, let him make somebody miss, and then see if somebody can catch him.
Yeah, and even if he's out there on snaps as a decoy, I mean, yes. I think at some point there will be safeties that will move out of the box that are in the box just because he is on the field. To me, it's just this is not a Bill Laser thing because it wasn't a Ken Zampese thing, even though he only had him for 2 games and one of which was the fumble play. But I think if you design 2-3 plays a game for him, a shovel pass, a little crossing route, something safe where he can do it, and you give him yards after the catch opportunity, that should be enough. And then the other 10 to 15 snaps he's on the field, he's a decoy, and that's it. And
you want to know how many?
I mean, if you're that, go ahead.
I was going to say, you want to know how many catches per game Will Fuller's averaging?
He's got a lot because I have him on my fantasy team.
He's averaging less than 3 catches a game, though. He's just housing them because they're throwing.
Yards. Yeah, the yards. Yeah.
Right, but I'm saying a guy like Ross is the same thing. Get him the ball and let him work. And I agree with you. It's got to be Marvin, because if I'm Bill Laser, I can't look myself in the mirror and say, I'd rather have Cody Core out there for the 5 punts in the game versus John Ross for the 40 snaps I can put him in. Come on. Have Fedulum cover punts and figure it out.
I see Tom Brooks in the YouTube chat, and he has a good point, saying, to be honest, I think at least I think he's talking about Ross. To be honest, he looks a little lost out there. Maybe so. And you don't want a rookie going out there and running wrong routes and potentially causing more turnovers to an offense that can ill afford that. I understand it. I get it. But he is a weapon. You drafted him for a reason. You drafted him at number 9 for a reason. And even if you don't trust him on offense, maybe give him a punt return or 2. Maybe give him a kickoff return or 2. See if he can dance around and get you to midfield every once in a while and get you some great starting field position, because he was electric as a returner in college.
on offense, how can he ever feel comfortable when you give him 5 snaps? How is he ever going to get comfortable in the offense with the quarterback when you give him 5 snaps? I mean,
exactly.
If you're a team and you send him out there and say he's going to be a decoy, and the other team just keeps their safeties deep down in the box or keeps them rolled to AJ, you know what you do on the very next series? You go over the sideline, you say, hey, Andy, first play, Ross is going to be in the slot. He's going deep. Throw him the ball. Because guess what? They can keep that safety over there on AJ, and then when he chucks him that deep ball, whether he catches it or not, the next time he's in there, out of the box. You can't afford, because they know for a fact if that ball connects, it's 6 and it's momentum swing.
Yep.
One of the things you can't factor is that how quickly that shifts the needle on the team's attitude when somebody it's like hitting a home run in baseball. It's more than the one run it puts on the board. It's the positive momentum that the team gets from it. You throw a 60, 70-yard play, the team gets pumped up, and they say, we're going to go get this now. We can do it.
What will frustrate me, and I don't want to continue to harp on this because we've got a couple other questions, then we got to get out of here. But what would frustrate me is if the Bengals start losing games, and I hope they don't, but if the Bengals start losing games, right? And of course, then at that point, you're 3-7, you're 4-9, whatever it is, in the last handful of games, you're like, well, which they've done in seasons that have been lost. Well, let's see what we got out of our young guys. And all of a sudden, John Ross is a guy that you create plays for. You get him in there because it's like, well, we got to see what we got out of him. And he explodes in a number of different facets. That would drive me nuts if that were to happen.
And then kill their draft position by winning games that they shouldn't at the end of the year because they play guys they should have been playing all year.
Right. And that would drive me nuts.
Though.
Now,
I'm with you.
I don't want
to lose my mind if we're like, oh, now we're going to play him, and him and Malone just start ripping it up.
Gosh, yeah, that would. Again, that's down the road. They've got a lot of games to play. There's a lot to happen over this next half of the season. But if that hypothetical were to happen, I would just not be very pleased about the approach. And we've seen Marvin. Unfortunately, we have seen Marvin. For those of you who have followed the Cincinnati Bengals, we have seen Marvin play favorites and totally not play favorites with young players, rookies, that sort of thing. Because they don't practice the right way, quote unquote, because they can't stay healthy, quote unquote, whatever the case may be. Sometimes you gotta let guys play, and there are guys. I don't want to open a can of worms, but you can sit here and say, Tim Tebow, for example, not the prettiest practice player, whatever. Somehow he won games in ugly ways. A gamer. There are guys who are just gamers, and even though they don't practice the right. Carlos Dunlap was a guy. He sat for basically the first half of his rookie season. All of a sudden, second half of his rookie season, he explodes and gets, I think, 9.5 sacks that year. You have to just. It's this odd dichotomy to me, Cody, because they supposedly really, really trust their draft process, and that's where they hang their hats on. Yet there's so many players that end up having to bide their time. Yeah, and guys don't make the team. J.J. Dielman, Jake Elliott, guys don't make the team, or they end up having to bide their time, sometimes unfairly. And to me, it's just. It's boggling. Frustrated by it. I know my co-host Cody Toomey is frustrated by it. So let's not lose any more hair pulling it out over it, my friend. Let's move on to the next question here. I'm going to lean on you a little bit for this one. It's two from good friend John Telly. He sent us this via email, eobinsider@gmail.com. The first one is, can you explain the restricted, unrestricted status of AJ McCarron at the end of the year? Also, what does that mean for the Bengals if he is somewhere else for next year? I'll say this. Apparently, AJ McCarron is appealing with the league. We don't know exactly the details on it, but it seems as if he is appealing his restricted free agency status and trying to be an unrestricted free agent next year. Now, if he was to do that, and if he was to win that appeal, he would be probably a very hot commodity on the market. Probably by the Browns. But essentially, if you really want me to get technical, a restricted free agent is one with 3 accrued seasons, 6 or more regular season games with a team. So not someone who's just been on a practice squad, of service, who has received a qualifying offer, that sort of thing. And what happens there is in this case with McCarron, the Bengals would have kind of the first right to offer him the proper contract. And then as a restricted free agent, that's when other teams can come in and do offer sheets, and try and match or better offers. And then the Bengals would then have to say, okay, yeah, we'll match this offer. And then they would have the first right to this player. Now, if you remember a couple of years ago,
Hawkins.
This happened with Andrew Hawkins. And the Bengals gave him a low round tender, and he ended up leaving, and the Bengals kind of had egg on their face of that. Now, I will say this: when you tender a player, there is a first round designation, a second round designation, and then there's a designation that is
the round they were picked
by their correct. Or if they were an undrafted free agent, you do not receive compensation, which I believe is what happened with Andrew Hawkins. So
correct.
If the Bengals were to do something with AJ McCarron, they would, and they say, as a restricted free agent, you would need to, X team, whoever wants him, would need to pay this contract. And if they don't, then the Bengals would receive a first round compensation, a second round compensation, whatever their compensation is. Obviously, the money value is higher. That's my interpretation of it. Now, if you want to add anything to that, Cody, I'm all ears. But what do you think the Bengals do? Is my real question to you with McCarron in this regard going forward?
So yeah, you pretty much nailed it on the head. There's a certain amount of money, which is pretty significant for the first round tender. The second round tender is less money, but still substantial. But I think, for McCarron's case, it would be a 5th round tender, which I don't think they will do, because at that point you just you're not getting much in return. So if he wins this battle, they'll probably get a 3rd round comp when he leaves. But I don't think he'll win it because he was on the NFI. If I were the Bengals, which I am not, but what I would do as the Bengals is give him the 2nd round tender and hope that someone comes to sign him. Because if you give him the 1st round tender, that's fine. But honestly, you probably are going to end up paying him that 1st round tender price because no one's going to come give a 1st round pick to get him. Now, ideally, if you're the Bengals, you tag him with the 2nd round tender, then the team has to give up their 2nd round pick that year. So if Cleveland were to come get him, you're getting picked 33 or 34 or 35, wherever they're at, for AJ McCarron, which is a pretty good haul, and it's better than the 90-something pick, which you would get if he went as a comp pick. So if I were the Bengals, that's what I would do. I'd give him the 2nd round tender and hope someone comes to get him. Not
I totally agree,
offer,
because
whatever it is, and take it.
Yep, I totally agree, because I think that is manageable in terms of a salary if you were to keep him. And I think that he probably would get scooped up because that is a doable cost for clubs that need a quarterback. You look at Miami, you look at Cleveland. There's a lot of.
If you keep him, remember you have until the week 8, week 9 to trade him. Contract
right.
Team might want. You might still get a 2nd or a 3rd out of him later in the year.
Yep, and I've been asked also, both at Cincy Jungle and various platforms, what about the transition tag on him? Well, unfortunately, if you know about the transition tag, essentially that's a lower version of the franchise tag, where the franchise tag you would have to a team, if they were to sign somebody away as a franchise tagged player, they would have to give up first round compensation. Transition tag is a little different, but the transition tag only applies to unrestricted free agents. So if AJ McCarron does not get his appeal granted to become an unrestricted free agent, and he remains a restricted free agent, the Bengals cannot and would not use the transition tag.
Could not.
On AJ
Way
McCarron.
Too much money.
Yeah.
It would be more than Dalton makes, even the transition.
Yep.
Transition tag, think Tyler Eifert. I think that Tyler Eifert might be a guy they transition tag.
Good point. Good point, especially with his injury history and all of that.
It'll be lower than the regular tag, and if somebody wants to come get him with the transition tag, they've got to give up a 2. So at least you get something in compensation right away, because someone's probably going to pay him, and if somebody wants to come in and pay him, instead of getting a 3rd round next year, you'll get a 2nd round again this year. Pile up picks.
I agree.
And the transition tag for tight ends is only like a little bit more than what he made this year, so manageable.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a side conversation, but it is going to be interesting to see what the market is for a guy like Tyler Eifert, just not only for the Bengals, but teams around the league. So, follow-up question, a quick one for you, Cody. I actually don't really know, to be honest. I don't know if I know the answer to this one. My gut feeling when I watched it and rewatched it was that this was on the offensive line. We talked earlier about the special teams woes of the Bengals against the Colts. John Telly, his second question was, what happened on last week's blocked field goal? Was it on Randy Bullock, the offensive line, the snap, or something else? My understanding is that the left, at least from kind of what I saw, the left side of the offensive line just collapsed and into the middle too. But that's me. That's kind of what I saw. Did you happen to rewatch that and see what was happening there?
Yeah, I watched it. I couldn't really tell. I'm with you. I think somebody lost their balance on the left side, and it kind of domino effect, because they usually interlock their legs in the field goal blocking,
right?
You know, so if one guy goes down, it can kind of domino effect. I think Bullock hit it a little bit low, because it was a pretty short kick for him to be kicking as low as he did. But I think that one was on the offensive line. As much as I want to pin it on Bullock, I feel like he could have kicked it much higher. But at the same time, if you're him, you want to bang it through because it's short. You don't want to float it up in the air and have it shift. So I would say that was on the offensive line.
I agree, and I do agree with the trajectory that you're talking about with Randy Bullock's kick. I thought that was low, but I also think, he's kind of saying this is kind of. I think it was a pretty short field goal attempt, and he's probably saying, this is kind of a gimme. I can kick this one in my sleep, given that everything else works and everything else didn't work.
It's kind of like putting in golf, right? The short putts, you just pound them hard and get them through. So he may have been trying to make sure he didn't miss a little chippy, so he hit it low and hard, and then if the line gives in, they're going to be able to get their hand on it.
Yeah. Yep. So that's kind of our take, and thanks for all the listener questions this week. We did get a nice compliment from Tom Brooks in the YouTube chat saying, by the way, love the podcast. I must listen every week if you can't be here live. Greatly appreciate that. And it's due to my co-host, Scott Schultze, guys like Cody Toomey who come on this program, Joe Goodberry, other SB Nation writers from blogs that, the Bengals are facing that week. And we try and mix it up. We try and have some fun, but give you some insight, and I'm glad it's appreciated. Cody.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Before we get out of here, Yeah, that's pretty cool stuff. I appreciate it. And Cody, I don't know if you've been listening recently, but we also get some nice compliments and questions from people internationally, people that live in the UK and in Asia, and there's people in the Caribbean that listen to this program. So it's pretty cool to know that, number one, there's Bengals fans all over the globe, and number two, that they listen to this podcast and enjoy it. And I hope we can continue to bring that same content to you. So, Cody, you are international on this show, my friend.
Can't believe it. Never thought those words would be uttered.
Well, before we get out of here, score prediction for this week, Bengals at Jaguars.
All right, I'm probably not going to make any friends here, but I feel like it's going to be low scoring. I feel like the run game and the defense of the Jags may be too much. I'm going to say 17-10 Jaguars.
I am so inclined to I know. Womp, 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 womp. I am so inclined to agree with you. But I guess I have to be the positive voice on this episode here. I'll say 20-17 Bengals. And I'm riding a one game hot streak. So I got to ride the hot streak,
Hey, and you never know, having a guy like Ross be forced into Marvin's hands, maybe he causes trouble. Maybe he one of the underestimated factors of him is if those safeties come out of the box because of his speed, maybe they can start running the ball.
Yep. And, I agree with you that this very well could be a very ugly game for the Bengals, just given the pass defense that is so strong for the Jaguars. And I agree that this is a tough game to win, but I do think, on the other hand, it's also a winnable game. I don't think the Jaguars are invincible. Yeah, I don't think the Jaguars are invincible. I think they have some issues, but like you said, there's just some weird – if you look at statistical rankings of teams and units and all of that stuff, there's some weird mismatches coming up on this week. So it's going to be – you're going to need to watch and see, is the terrible Jaguars run defense going to be – is it going to stifle the Bengals' awful run offense? Is the strong passing defense of the Jaguars going to stifle the Bengals' meh passing offense? I mean, there's all kinds of different. Are the Bengals going to be able to rush the passer well, which they have done all year against a pretty decent Jaguars offensive line in terms of protecting the passer? A lot of different things going on.
There's always a chance that Bortles goes Bortles.
That's true. And there's two different Bortles. That's for sure. Cody, thanks for joining in, man. I know you're driving, and I know you're on your way back, driving through the dirty South there, my friend. But drive safe.
Hey, man.
Thanks for coming on.
Made my drive very enjoyable. I appreciated it.
Hopefully. Thanks for joining in, man. Well, we'd love to have you on anytime. And if you have not subscribe to this program, you can do so on SoundCloud. Subscribe there. You can subscribe on YouTube. You can subscribe to our iTunes channel as well. Get all the content there. You can also get our content on cincyjungle.com, and you can get in touch with the program on Twitter at BengalsOBI. Follow us there, as well as get in touch with us via email, theobinsider@gmail.com. Cody, where can they follow you on Twitter? You put out a lot of good stuff, and you talk a lot of Bengals on Twitter, that's for sure.
Same handle as before, at CODIKI, Kodakai. So follow me on Twitter, and every once in a while I'll say positive things about the Bengals too.
He's a very every once in a while there's a positive. All of us have those moments. We get a little.
I try to be very real, though. I think a lot of times with the Bengals media, they're just too soft, and they're like, "Oh, things are going to be great," and sometimes you just need to be like, "That wasn't very good." We need to.
Well, that's what happens when the club pays your bills. You know what I mean?
Very true. Yet they have yet to pay one of my mortgages, so I can say what I want.
You and I believe, kind of share a brain a bit with the Bengals in terms of, there's realism, there's positivity, there's some negativity. It just comes with the team. And, I appreciate that. And I think a lot of people who ardently follow if you follow Joe Goodberry, he's a guy that also kind of exudes all of those range of emotions as well. It just comes with being a fan of the team, but also trying to be objective and see what you see on film, see what you see week to week. So give Cody a follow if you haven't yet, and subscribe to our channels. Also, keep it to cincyjungle.com for all of the breaking news, information, and analysis of the Bengals this season. We appreciate all the support for this program and at Cincy Jungle. Again, for Cody Toomey, I'm Anthony Cosenza. This has been the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Thanks for tuning in.